Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think a lot of you will be familiar with Riddle's Court. I've been working there for the last 3.5 years, and it's been a fairly interesting project so far. For those not familiar with the site, it's situated near the the Lawn Market, and it stretches down to Victoria Terrace. And the property is currently leased or under ownership by the Scottish Historical Buildings Trust, who commissioned the work, and it's funded through a lottery grant and public subscription. So the first phase of the work was undertaken in 2012-2013. And the main objective was a full structural analysis of what we could see in its current state. And we got the help of a chap in Stirling University, Alistair Ross, who looked at the 16th and 17th century archive. No historical work on the archive side of things had been examined, and so that was very useful. And then we looked at the phase development and the current circulation plans. Again, all the desk-based assessment that you would normally do. And we also commissioned some basic dendro dating where we could get access. And so the outcome from that was a full recommendation when the work began for refurbishment on targeted watching briefs and more detailed fabric recording during refurbishment. And we identified suitable areas for the phase 2 dendro dating. So this is an extract from Rothermay's map of 1647, and it shows the development of Riddle's Court with the courtyard scenario set in, and this is the High Street, and you can see this extensive formal garden stretching down to the south, showing the kind of high status of the building. And of interest are these 3 outshot buildings or jams that were later destroyed by Victoria Street, and I'll come to that. So there's a big roll call of the great and the good, who either had tenure of the property or even indeed owned parts of the property. I should have said that the building was founded in 1578 thereabouts by a Bailey McMorran, who was a rich merchant of Edinburgh, who met an untimely death down at the Holyrood end of the High Street when he was shot by a student. But apparently he owned he had shares in several merchant ships and other properties. So again, just a quick roll call of the people who lived there. We had Alexander Seton in 1596, John Clerk of Pennycook. In 1630, there's John Maitland, the Earl of Lauderdale, again, renting in apartments or even owning parts. The Chancellor, Sir John Smith, 1662. And the Duchess Anne of Buccleuch, 1714. She was responsible for the large swathes of refurbishment, and she kept meticulous accounts of every penny she spent, by the sound of it. And then David Hume lived there for a short while. Again, it's all documented. And then it brings us to kind of like a watershed, if you like, where the property was owned in 1890 by Sir Patrick Geddes. He was ahead of his time. He was a traveller, writer, geographer, and I think I read somewhere that he coined the term conurbation. And he was really ahead of his time in that he realised that these old properties didn't need to be destroyed, and that they could be conserved and refurbished for other uses. So he was ahead of his time. He actually published various pamphlets from Riddle's Court, as well as holding various art schools and things like that. And he was the first to actually develop the property as a halls of residence for students. And there's an inventory of mainly medical students from abroad, and with a fair idea what part of the building was occupied by the students. And it's interesting to know that they were moaning about the quality of the water supply, so nothing really alters. And then this chap, the future James Bond, he stayed there, or rather used the place as when it was rented out to the Fetler Youth Club, and he played on the team there. And again, there's anecdotal evidence that he liked it that much because he could get a bath. And then the building's been used from the early 80s as part of the Fringe, and this is where Hugh Fry met, Hugh Fry. Is it Stephen Fry met Hugh Laurie there, yeah. That's it. So what's the royal connections? Well, King James VI of Scotland on 1st of England married Queen Anne of Denmark, and they hosted a fairly lavish banquet for Ulrich, the Queen Anne's brother-in-law, the Duke of Holstein. And that event is commemorated in a really elaborate ceiling, painted ceiling that was exposed in the 1960s, and it underwent conservation, and you can see it's very detailed with the thistle and the crown of the Danish kind of, what's the word, involvement there, commemorated. And this is still present. You can still see this within the property in the North Block. I mentioned the North Block. This is the northwest corner of the North Block. So we're dealing with the courtyard block of buildings. And this was originally a 4-storey building. We've lost the roof, and I can develop a little bit about that later on. But so this is as it was before. It's been, if you went there now, the Harling's been stripped off and replaced, and again, a lot of fabric repair. And this is looking down into the courtyard. Again, as I mentioned, the building's been rehauled, and it's a nice ochre kind of paintwork, and again, an awful lot of refurbishment. This was part of the South Block, part of the North Block, and the so-called East Block. I mentioned Victoria Street and Terrace. This is the main south-facing elevation of Riddle's Court, and that's our part of Riddle's Court. These buildings either side were Victorian, and this was actually built again, totally rebuilt back in the Victorian period to accommodate the big curving sweep of Victoria Terrace. And it's a feat of engineering that they didn't bring the whole place down, because it was actually completely rebuilt from that level up to the roof. So there's our curve again of Victoria Terrace. And from this map from the 18th century, we have good reliable evidence for the present sort of outshot buildings that I mentioned on the Rotherham map. You can see a straight stair up into the courtyard, and then out through the Pend onto the Lawn Market. One of the things we did during the first phase of work was to use the existing architects' elevations and add contextual detail that we could see, and that accounts for this numbered up stonework. And as the scaffolding went up, I was able to get access to areas, newly exposed areas, and that provided a lot of evidence for reused material, as well as a lot of relieving arches above a lot of these windows, and what you see there is mainly 19th century insertions. One of the things I did was enlist the help of this chap, the late Charles McKean, who helped me for 3 or 4 days on the site. And we went round every corner, every nook and cranny we could, where we could get access, and we built up this rather kind of chaotic chronology of notes and various dottings to help us build up a phased development model. One of the things we also did, the good thing about using architectural plans where they are found to be reliable, is that you can drape them on top of each other, so we can get a kind of almost like a CAD version of a wall thickness analysis. And that really helped us understand what kind of periods a lot of these partition walls had been introduced. So from that kind of data that we gathered above, we was able to build up this scenario of phased development. And this is obviously going to alter slightly from the results that we've gathered over the last year. What we're finding is that we've got windows in various positions that look out onto what is now buildings. And I didn't show them today, but I've got several block windows and doors that obviously went out into open space. And there is a reference in the historical record for the building being surrounded by waste ground, whether that's buildings that have burnt down or have kind of collapsed or whatever. There was access either side of the building prior to its main development in the 18th century, or probably earlier than that. One of the things about the building is it's a right mousetrap or rabbit warren of different levels, and to understand how the building worked in the late 16th century, the late 16th century, was the insertion of turnpike staircases or spiral staircases. Again, modelled on a lot of the material was rather the idea behind this was certainly archaeological in the top right corner, certainly archaeological on this side where a window had been reduced in size that could have accommodated a spiral stair. This present one is much later, but it's obviously relevant for the archaeology that lay within that area. And this fella up here that is kind of maybe a bit kind of not so reliable as we like it to be. So by understanding what was missing, it helped us build up a bigger picture of what or how people would have circulated around the building. Because as I say, at the present time, there was no formal access between the east block and this block. And similarly, there was no access between the first floor and the second floor. One had to go out what they call a Pentis staircase that was built in Geddes' time. And so there was no, once this staircase, or this one, sorry, once that one had gone, there was no formal access between the various levels. So again, this is just to show the kind of complexity of the various levels and the scenarios behind each room. So the phase 2 works then was targeted watching briefs, level 3 type spec for fabric recording. That's kind of very analytical level, if you like, and more dendro dating. So this is where I'm at now, actually. Oops, sorry. I'm just at this stage now writing up the data structure report, and hopefully we'll get a good publication out of that at some point in the future. So just to put some flesh on the bones, this is the ladies' toilet on the ground floor, and we had an idea that there was a fireplace lying at the back of here because there's a plan, a rudimentary plan that was drawn up in 1859 by a chap called Aitken, and he's annotated the plan quite conveniently with arch blocked up, kitchen inserted. So that set the alarm bells ringing in that this was an area that needed to be carefully looked at when they came to deal with this particular room. And the architect was keen to cut back this wall by about 1 metre. And they knew that it was a thick wall, but they didn't realise what lay behind it. So we've got this huge big fireplace with the arched head, or the voussoirs, if you like, and then above it a larger relieving arch above. And inside we've got the fireplace that was referred to what turned out to be a coal cupboard. This chap's busy drilling out the brickwork after it had been recorded, and that was it, completely emptied. And in the corner on the left hand side we've got a nice bread oven and a salt press. And this is quite interesting in that it's huge. That's a 2 metre rod there. So SHB, the Scottish Historic Buildings Trust, got quite excited. Was this the fireplace used for the banquet? Well, maybe that's a big wish, but nonetheless of interest. And so that's the exterior of the wee bread oven, and that's the interior, and it was lined with these small refractory type bricks, clay, highly fired bricks, and there was no flue out of it, so it would be brought to temperature before the big fire was lit, and then the cakes put in and taken out when they were cooked. And that's the salt press on the right hand side, place where the salt would be kept dry. One of the things we found, I've got 7 fireplaces unrecorded, or hitherto unknown, if you like, in various rooms. This is a ground floor room leading to the kitchen. We knew that the press was there. There'd been a press, a cupboard, and to the left of it was this large fireplace, probably of 18th century date. I mentioned the East Block early on. This was used by the Workers' Education Authority. They had their offices there, I should have mentioned that. This was one of these poky little room lined with tongue and groove planking. When it was all stripped off, it revealed another fireplace and, interestingly, an earlier roof line. This is the church. This is the wall of the church built against it next door, and there's all sorts going on in this one, in this elevation. But one of the things that I think I don't show it actually, but the door leading into this room was actually a secondary insert. The primary door to it was very nicely moulded with Ashley stonework. And Charles McKean thought that the only way that it could be accessed was through a gallery, a suspended wooden gallery that ran off a curtain wall that across the courtyard. And so this was kind of interest in that could it be the kind of, if you like, a royal procession into the building? And it's quite feasible. And he was drawing on the gallery scenario from various examples in Dundee. So we're in the North Block, next to the room with the elaborate painted ceiling. In the 60s, when the elaborate, let's say, beam, the painted beam room was exposed, a lot of material went up into the various lath and plaster ceilings were taken down, and plasterboard ceilings put up. And when this was taken down about a year and a half ago, it revealed another painted ceiling. And we can see, and there's only one board, a pine board, surviving with paintwork in situ. And an expert in the kind of the paint side of things has done some paint analysis and the stylistic kind of trends of it all. And she's of the opinion that it's the same artist or the same quality, if you like, as the main known painted beam room. So this had suffered badly through the insertion of, or the erection of lath and plaster ceiling, as well as old floorboards and then more recent new ones. On the room above, there's a really in situ ornate 17th century plaster ceiling, and it's quite important in that it's got these symbols of the crown or the union, whatever. And but the bad thing was that this was very cracked and prone to collapse. So the roof above, this is the rooftop of the North Block. When several layers of old roof was taken off, this is kind of like a 1960s level, and below it there was, you can't see it in the shot, but behind, in this direction, there was earlier trusses or bits of timber that had been inserted to make almost like a lattice structure, if you like. And then this fellow were lying below that. That square hole was where a fire alarm was inserted from the upper level, and certain boards had been lost on this side for some reason, but there wasn't present. And so we were suspicious in the width of the boards, and that if we'd got painted ceilings, so far there was a chance that we might get one, and we did. So the whole of the floor is painted. And this is just a sample of the quality of the paintwork that we recorded. So this is tempera paintwork, ground earth pigments. I'll just press on. So we numbered up the boards. This is just a sequence shot so that these boards could be photographed upside down and then put back in the correct order. And the boards was held in place by almost like 5-inch long nails with a wrought forged head. And so these two joiners spent 2 or 3 days just lifting out each nail carefully. I mentioned the repair of the ceiling underneath. I think this is called the plaster tray method, where plaster of Paris is poured in with a mesh. There's a steel mesh over the joists, and this allows the lath and plaster ornate ceiling laths to stick to the plaster. So basically, it just arrests it, if you like, from any further decay. So this is the boards put back after analysis. This is a montage of the whole of the, as I mentioned, every board was photographed and then fired into this super software that can play about with pixels or whatever it does, and you can see the artwork running alongside the beams. The non-painted bit was where the beam would have been nailed to the beads. This is a negative of the same image, and this shows the parallel lines along this floret motif, if you like, that's repeated across the. Okay, this is my attempt at building a picture of how the paintwork would have looked. So we've got first an iron oxide, maybe crushed brick, and then cobalt, which actually turns black, and then a chalk medium on top. And then adjacent to the room with the ornate plaster, we found another ceiling. And this is just, the red boxes just show the close similarities, basically, between the two ceilings. So we've got the same artist, basically. Whoever commissioned it used the same person. This is just a shot that shows when you see it in natural daylight, under ordinary flash photography, you don't get the quality as when you light it up. When you light it up with stereo LED lighting that really illuminates it. So this is the dendro results. There's a date stone on the west block, and Anne Crone did the dendro on 17 timbers, and we're getting a massive correlation for the date of 1586, 1587, and 1590 on the north block, as we suspected. And the crosshatch is just reused timbers that had been found. We found that the turnpike staircase roof had got reused timber worked into it. Finds, mainly, these were all mainly unstratified, apart from this one that came out of a floor layer in the so-called pigsty on the north block, and it's a small copper mount with gilding on the back. I'm not quite sure at this stage what that is. We've got 19th century wallpaper, a child's cup, and this nice carved wooden finial. Again, I don't know whether it's come off furniture, but there's no carving on the back of it. Presume it looks like oak, and with a small pin going through to fix it to something upright. So the archaeology has informed the design of the building. The scaffold tower is actually marking out the position of a lift shaft, and there's Patrick Geddes overseeing everybody there. The important thing is that we've left, or they're going to leave, the architect's going to leave, or will be by now exposed, all the fireplaces that we found on that elevation. So as you travel up from the basement up to the top, obviously the floor layers have been introduced, but the lift has got a glass rear to it, and so you'll be able to see the fireplaces left exposed. And the archaeology is also informing the phase, the interpretation of the site, because it was so complicated that obviously we're going to have to provide the interpreters with all the relevant details. So in conclusion then, the phase 1 development model has been challenged by the phase 2 results, as we'd expected, because it's opened up, the building's been opened up, so the anatomy of the building is more revealed and better understood. The combined dendro work undertaken so far confirms a felling date between 1586 and 1590. Again, it's all imported timber from Norway. The 3 newly discovered arabesque painted beam and board ceilings within the north block collectively raised the status of this part of the complex. What I should have mentioned was the north block was much bigger, and it was part of what the historical records called the Great Tenement, or the Fore Tenement, and that seems to be the base where McMorran stayed initially, and then it was eventually it falls to brothers, and they let out the rear, the south block, which was called the Back Tenement. And so the archaeological results that I've shown have contributed to the building design and site interpretation. And this is where I'm at now, working on the final report and eventually there'll be hopefully a peer-reviewed paper coming out of that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.